October. I hope you've had a chance to look at the minutes. I'll just go through them page by page just for accuracy only. Page 5, page 6, page 7, page 8, page 9, page 10, page 11, 12, 13, 14 and 15. Do I have a proposal that they are a true record of the minutes held on the 19th of October? Vice Chairman proposed, Councillor Taylor seconded. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Any abstentions? Thank you very much indeed. Quite remiss of me, can I welcome Councillor Keeley here for the first meeting? Welcome, Councillor Keeley. I'm sorry, I'm sad that you had your personal circumstances, but you're very welcome to be here today. Thank you. Right, I understand that Councillor McNally is joining us virtually today. The agenda this morning may be shorter than what members of the committee are used to. However, I'd still like to remind officers and members the importance of summarising key points of reports and making concise questions and contributions. At this point, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of our invited guests today from Bishop Grotesk University, both the students and the accompanying lecturers, to welcome them to the meeting. I'm a firm believer of the benefits of students' engagements with democratic process and procedures, and today they have the opportunity to observe in person the value and impact of scrutiny in local authority decision making. That will hopefully prepare them for their future democratic and civic engagement, so welcome to them. I'll now move on to Executive Council announcements. Councillor McNally.
Thank you, Chairman. Just wanted to update on a couple of things from the last meeting and a couple of other items. So, construction on the new Tacticial Hwrc site will start on the 6th of December with a 6-month construction period and will be the 11th that we own and operate. The site will be larger than the existing site and provide a better experience for residents to dispose and recycle their material. And we will be investigating whether we can operate a reuse shop as a way of diverting material from waste and possibly generating income. The rollout of the separate paper and card collection has taken place in Boston Borough and North Kesteven with the introduction of the purple lidded wheelie bins. This has created a significant improvement in contamination levels and recycling rates and has now been approved by West Lindsey District Council to continue to roll out in the next area. I would like to thank officers and councillors at both Boston Borough and North Kesteven councils for the effort that has gone into making a success of this. Contamination rates have been improved in both Boston and North Kesteven. Before the rollout, contamination in the mixed recycling was in excess of 30% on average. Currently, Boston's average contamination rate after 7 months is now 22%, and North Kesteven's, currently after 2 collections, is 19%. Also, Palm Paper report that the quality for Lincolnshire's paper and card material sent to them exceeds 98%. We are working on creating a set of new metrics to represent the overall recycling stream, considering the changes being implemented through the introduction of these new rollouts. The twin stream implementation is supported by 4 performance and improvement officers who go out with the District Council bin crews to engage and educate the public to ensure that the right thing goes in the right bin, which is invaluable in creating behavioural change. This is complemented by a further 2 officers who work alongside the district's customer service team when the demand from residents is at its highest, which is normally the first 4 to 6 months of the implementation, and 1 sampling officer providing the sample data on a daily basis. The internal sampling facility allows us to sample the recycling collected by either the bin round or the number on the bin vehicle. The evidence shows that the waste composition varies based upon the location of the round, i.e. rural versus urban, and the levels of contamination are typically higher on those grounds close to urban settlements. It would indicate that lifestyle of residents plays a significant part in the composition of waste, i.e. access to shops and takeaway food outlets, and having the internal capability and capacity to sample waste in real time allows us to target specific engagement and communications to parts of districts and to tailor the message accordingly. The Performance Improvements team have been creating and testing a package for primary schools. Kirkby-le-Thorpe Primary School have been instrumental in helping to test this concept and also supported in making promotional videos to use in district-wide communications. We also did some similar communications and engagement work in Boston Primary School during a rollout. The final packages are being completed now and be ready to commence delivery after Christmas. This will include delivery to schools by means of assemblies, as well as resources for schools to download and complete. We are also working with our disposal contractors to put together some ongoing engagement and competition type activities that can be delivered in partnership. These will be sent out using the LCC Education Bulletin, which is sent to each school weekly. Thank you, Chairman. I will also ask Rachel and Mike to bring a paper forward to a future committee about the ongoing work.
Thank you very much indeed. Can I now move to Councillor Colin Davey, Executive Councillor? Thank you. Good morning, Councillor.
Good morning, Chairman, and thank you. Firstly, I'm pleased to see that we have a very interesting agenda for today, and you're covering some critical issues across the portfolio, from trees to infrastructure to investment. Very critically, I now understand that an announcement on the Levelling Up White Paper will be made by government in the week commencing December the 13th. So today's agenda is very relevant. Levelling up is, of course, critically linked to infrastructure for Lincolnshire, particularly as we need to address decades of underinvestment by central government as we strive for a fairer funding deal for all of our residents. I'm pleased, therefore, to see you'll be looking at our infrastructure today, from the flood and water agenda through to growth and development. You will hear how officers are preparing the authority to be able to respond strongly across these issues. I'd like to start with some positive news with regards to infrastructure investment. City Fibre has announced it will invest £21 million into a new citywide network that will bring full fibre broadband connectivity to Lincoln. Many of us in the chamber know the reality of broadband, particularly in rural areas, is challenging, and we will continue to lobby for improvements nationally on this, as well as the excellent work that has been achieved with parishes across the county. But all of us know there is much, much more to do. Elsewhere, initial results from the Lincolnshire Quarterly Economic Survey shows a fall in UK market activity levels, with export markets activity contracting. However, confidence levels remain very high. Officers are continuing to analyse these trends so that we can best understand how to shape our support across all sectors. Nationally, a Resolution Foundation report into the long-term implications of COVID-19 on the labour market have shown that at the end of the job retention scheme, there has not been a spike in unemployment, but that participation in the labour market has actually reduced, with 586,000 more economically inactive people than at the start of the pandemic. We are hearing this regularly from business, many of whom are struggling to recruit and retain staff. And as an example, the Great Resignation in America has seen 4.2 million people quit their jobs without seeking further employment. Locally, here are some highlights for members to look out for. Earlier this year, the committee looked at the work plan for the Aventus Business Centre in Market Deeping, and I'm pleased to say that the redesign work is now well underway. Furthermore, work is now drawing to a close at the Boatshed Cafe on Hut Off Car Terrace. This is going to be a wonderful boost for the visitor economy in the spring of next year. And I hope that you will all book a visit into your plans for 2022. Officers attended the Fresh Produce Consortium Futures event at Lincolnshire Showground on the 4th of November, which was attended by approximately 1,000 people, including a big delegation from the Netherlands. The County Council were promoting the South Lincolnshire Food Enterprise Zone and the wider agri-food offer. I'm delighted to share with you that from discussions at the event, 2 leads are now being followed up with both a UK and a foreign investor. And also on the Food Enterprise Zone, the construction of the hub building, which was supported by the Getting Building Fund from the UK government, is well underway. Behind the scenes, we've also been working hard to make sure that we maintained a train service for this year's Lincoln Christmas market. And I want to say thanks to the leader who joined the MP's campaign to ensure that service changes did not stop people having the ability to travel to Lincoln for this weekend. And of course, this weekend is the Lincoln Christmas market and a chance for you all to start or perhaps even finish your Christmas shopping. So whether at Lincoln or elsewhere, can I encourage you all to think about our local traders this year, particularly our wonderful independent stores who struggle so much, which brings so much to our county. This Saturday, shop local and support our businesses across Lincolnshire. Finally, Chairman, I'd like to take this opportunity to wish you and all the members of the committee well as 2021 draws to a close. And I wish you all a very peaceful and healthy and happy Christmas and 2022. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Davey. Very interesting update, and just like to reiterate some of Councillor Davey's comments. I also visited the climate conference at the Epic Centre. Very interesting and very informative conference it was. Are there any other Executive Councillors' announcements? No. Councillor Baxter.
Are we allowed to ask questions?
Not normally, no, but if you've got a particularly pertinent question you wish to ask.
My question is about the process by which the County Council will respond to the various national infrastructure projects for solar across the county. I don't know how the county feeds into that process, and I'd be interested to know how we as members feed into the county's response.
I'll see if Councillor Davey, are you still there?
I am indeed, Chairman, and I'm happy to pick that up. Obviously, members will be aware we have 5 national infrastructure applications for giant solar farms in Lincolnshire. The County Council will obviously respond to the process in relation to those applications. We're not at that stage yet because a lot of the detail is not there for us to analyse. But officers in the planning department will look at each of the applications. We will probably look for external advice on some of them, particularly around the carbon balancing argument, around the need for food to be grown in Lincolnshire. So we will look at the benefits of land for food and land for renewable energy and weigh those up before we respond. I will ensure members involved in all the areas where these applications are situated are engaged with the process. All of them were invited to briefings from the developers on these local applications, but we will ensure that all members participate in the process as we go forward.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Baxter, are you happy with that response? Thank you. Now we move on to senior officers. Vanessa, any comments at all from yourself or your team?
Nothing from me, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed then. We now move on to the first substantive item, which is the service level performance reporting against Performance Framework 2021 to 2022, Quarter 2. The item is on pages 17 to 40 of the agenda pack and brings together the Quarter 2 performance for economy, flooding and waste. The report will be presented by Samantha Harrison, Head of Economic Development, David Hickman, Head of Environment, and Mike Reid, Head of Waste Services, who are all attending today. Vanessa, you go first. Thank you.
think it might be Samantha who's starting the paper, if that's all right, Chairman. Sorry, I think Samantha's going to take the first steer on the paper, if that's all right, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Good morning.
Good morning. So I'm Samantha Harrison, Head of Economic Development, and I'm going to update you on 3 of our service level performance targets. And I'm delighted to say this reports the targets from June to September this year. And in terms of our first target, it relates to the number of businesses supported throughout this period. I'm pleased to say we've exceeded the target. We've reached 1,126 businesses, and part of the reason we have exceeded it is because the council put in a very strong package of support to help businesses to navigate through the COVID circumstances. So with the grants that we put forward in terms of digital grants, business investment grants and rural support grants, we were able to support a further 800 businesses. And that has been really beneficial and helped them to maintain their momentum and then make that step forward. So we've exceeded the first target, which is pleasing. I would like to point out that we've also been successful in bidding for some future European Regional Development Fund money to actually enhance our business support programme. So the Business Lincolnshire Growth Hub will continue to support businesses with advisory support, with grants and with guidance and workshops and events from now until June 2023. So we've secured an extra £1.06 million, which is fantastic news and will help us to develop that moving forward. My second target is about the number of qualifications achieved by adults within the same period. We'd set an initial target of 600, and this target was based on, it was developed during the pandemic, and it was a forecast when we were trying to be as robust as we could, but bearing in mind that we might not get many learners accessing the programmes. On this one, I'm delighted to say that we've had a real increase in the uptake of the qualification provision. We had 973 individuals undertake qualifications with us. And this was because of a number of reasons. Our providers pivoted their provision. So they looked at reviewing their courses. They provided longer online courses with a number of qualifications attached to them. So this was really beneficial, where participants could participate at their own pace, but also within their own environment, and felt more confident to embrace more of the learning opportunities. We also had our providers, they looked to, with the opportunity of providing online provision, it actually inspired people to undertake more qualification courses rather than the general non-qualification courses. And a final thing, a reason why during the end of the summer period, when social distancing was easing and the COVID vaccine was working in terms of the rollout, people were more inclined to come back to a classroom environment where that necessitated the delivery of the course. So we've had a real increase, and I'm delighted to say, based on this, we have approached our Councillor Bradwell to actually increase the target. So we have applied and been successful in gaining approval to increase the target from 600 to 1,400. So we will be reporting at future meetings. And just to be clear, the kind of provision that we provide is entry-level pathway provision. So we're trying to help people with gain GCSEs, undertake ESOL qualifications, undertake level 1 and 2 qualifications. And the kind of things that they're in are hospitality, food hygiene, accountancy, business administration, construction and care. So that just gives you a flavour of the type of thing we're doing there. And the final target I want to report on is the level of external funding that we've achieved for Lincolnshire. So I'm pleased to report that we received over £15 million worth of funding within this period. This was predominantly due to an extension of some of our European Regional Development Fund projects that enables us to provide further business support across the Lincolnshire area, and also securing 12.9 million of the Get Britain Building Fund. So this money will fund the continuation and development of 6 major projects in Lincolnshire, and I look forward to reporting them to you at future meetings. And the 6 projects are the Lincoln Science and Innovation Park, the Greater Lincolnshire Cycle Programme, Killingholme Pumping Station, the Centre for Innovation and Rural Health, Holbeach Food Enterprise Zone Phase 2, and the Greater Lincolnshire Skills Capital Programme. So that's it. Thank you very much, Chairman. I'm open for questions, and if not, I'll hand over to David Hickman, who will follow me. Thank you
very much indeed. Before I move on, welcome Councillor Richard Burjoy. Is there any statement that you wish to make this morning?
Thank you, Chairman. No, I just thought it would be useful for me to sit in, that was all. I hope you don't mind.
No, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Now move on to Head of Economic Development, David Hickman. David.
Thank you.
Sorry, Chairman, is it appropriate to ask Samantha questions now about the 3 targets that she actually gave information on?
Yes, certainly, yes.
Whilst I think it's really worthy that the so many businesses have been given help, I'd just like a little bit more information on what criteria the help was given, because obviously being given a large number of businesses being given help it looks really good, but as you know, I have no idea on what basis that help was given, and also if what businesses perhaps applied and weren't given any help. So I wondered if Samantha could just give us some more information on the criteria that the help was given. And my second question, I don't want to ask too many questions, is again, being an ex-teacher, I think it's really worthy that during the COVID period, learners were given extra qualifications, particularly in the fields that you mention. But I would like to know if there's going to be any tracking in place about whether those learners actually achieve employability, because obviously that's the main aim. Now, I know that's quite a difficult thing to achieve, but obviously that would be, the sort of golden nugget at the end of the the effort that the employers, the learner providers have put in. So they're my 2 main questions, really. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. 2 very good questions. So, Samantha, are you able to answer those questions?
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Chairman. So in terms of the business support programmes and the provision that we provided, there were 4 different strands. So one was a rural support programme, one was a digital programme, one was a COVID recovery programme, and then there was an Invest for the Future. So we publicised these through the County Council website, through social media, through our councillor briefings, and through the Local Enterprise Partnership, and through our advisor network, and through the press to reach businesses. And we had a finite window where people were able to apply. So there was an online application process where they registered their interest, and then they were invited for a full application. So whilst we recognise that there are a lot more businesses out there than the 800 we directly supported, what I can say is that we have got a wider package of programmes. So anybody that wasn't able to access the grants within the timescales that we provided them, we did put people in touch with our advisors, and we have been able to assist a number of those afterwards. So it's one of those tricky situations where you open an opportunity within a finite timescale, and obviously some people do miss out or haven't got the time to pull the information together. But we were as robust as we could in terms of giving people advance notification of the kind of information they needed, their accounts, their business plans, an idea of the prices that would need to pay for their equipment and their services. So we did as much as we can to brief them, but obviously there are some people that weren't beneficial. In terms of your second question in relation to monitoring the qualification and the progress of the learners, we automatically have a very clear and robust system for monitoring destinations of all of our learners. So we follow up and we report that back. We have a learning board that we report that into, but I'm very happy to provide an update when we provide the service level targets at the next meeting, if you're happy for that.
Thank you. Yeah, that answers my question. I don't know whether I don't want to, have a sort of dialogue between us. My only concern is that businesses that are not particularly digitally prepared lost out, which, obviously is probably what happened. Thank you anyway.
Thank you very much indeed. I understand Councillor Baxter's next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. It's obviously great that we've exceeded our targets by so far in this area. Just specifically on the education target, we've got 973 by the end of Q2, which smashes the total for the whole year. Obviously, we'll hopefully carry on offering the courses, but if we've provided 7 times as much training as we expected, does that mean that we require 7 times the budget or 7 times the amount of staff, or is the additional cost of 1 extra learner, is it the same to provide learning for 150, the same as 900? Just want to understand that, and what does an extra learner mean?
Yes. So in terms of our learner provision, we get an allocation from the Department for Education, and we can apply for growth funding. So during the COVID year, because we saw the increase in the numbers that we were supporting, we did apply for extra further growth funding that gets added onto our allocation. But also, we have a framework of providers that deliver on our behalf, so we could actually increase their contracts, which they were pleased to do so, and it helps them survive throughout the COVID period. But also we were able to pivot some of the services. So where we'd cost venue costs and tutor costs, we're able to make that more robust because people were delivering online within a virtual environment. So there were some economies of scale and cost savings there. So and furthermore, if there were sort of any, what we were able to do is flex the courses. So we brought some of our funding forward to be able to meet the needs of the learners.
Happy with that, Councillor Baxter. Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very encouraging to hear about these targets being met. And regarding the support package, that's particularly encouraging to hear. And as we know, a number of us here are also councillors in other places, district, borough and city. And I know in South Holland, our economic development team did work with the county to try and promote these support packages, which I know reach some businesses in our area and exist because of that. And hopefully that also took place in other areas. If not, maybe in the future, Communications continue to do that. We work between our county and the districts and city and borough to reach those target audiences, because, as it's been said, there are some difficult to reach groups or businesses that may not be aware of what's available at the moment. So if we all continue to communicate this, it stands a better chance of reaching that target audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Samantha, do you wish to comment?
So just to say thank you very much, Councillor. It's we do work in partnership very closely with the district councils, and we amplify the messages throughout. So the economic development teams we meet with on a bi-monthly basis, but we send all of our communications out, and we've also supported each other through the COVID grant provision to make sure that all of our business community are aware, but also that we work together to look at the outputs and outcomes. So we are feeding those in, and we will be able to report back some of the successes from all of the programmes that we've delivered.
Thank you. Any further questions for members? No. David, you're on now. Apologies for keeping you waiting.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So this quarter we're reporting on one measure against flood risk, and that is the number of formal investigations commenced. As members may be aware, the County Council, as lead local flood authority for Lincolnshire, has a number of statutory powers and responsibilities to respond to flooding. These are separate from and additional to its role as a Category 1 responder, where it works in the emergency setting through the Fire and Rescue Service and through other partners. In terms of the investigations, we're required to set a threshold for those. We're required to determine where those are undertaken and where they're not. And the threshold that we've taken is an individual residential property internally flooded, significant disruption to the highways network, or disruption to significant community amenity or assets. So any of those circumstances will trigger a formal investigation. During the summer months, as members will see here on page 33, 13 such investigations were launched by flooding, which affected a total of 16 properties across those 13 investigations. Members may also be interested to know that in addition to these formal investigations, we do now maintain records of lower level flooding, where a formal investigation may not be triggered, but where we may have reports of flooding to gardens, or repeated flooding, which doesn't necessarily get into a property, but which through repetition or through concentration in a particular area might indicate there's an issue that we may need to have a look at in the longer term. So we do keep an eye on that broader context as well. Looking at page 34, the following page, to set this year's figures in context, we do now have quite a run of data going back to when these duties were first provided to the council by government. And as you'll see from the red line there, the general trend for the number of investigations begun is rising over the period. You'll also see there the very particular peak that still remains a, I want to say high point, but that's not exactly the right word. The very significant incidents of flooding that we experienced in 2019, when we had large numbers of properties flooded right across Lincolnshire, and some particularly prevalent incidents such as those at Wainfleet. You'll see from subsequent figures that while there have been fewer incidents since, the overall trend is still rising. So this is an issue that remains significant on our agenda, and something which officers will continue to work on as we go forward.
Thank you, David. Before I open up for members for questions, I've attended many incidents whereby flooding hasn't actually breached the door, got into the property. So it's really welcome to know that we will start looking at those severe cases which don't go to the property. Any members got questions? No? Thank you, David. I'll move on now to Mike Reid. Mike, are you there?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I hope you can hear me. I'm Mike Reid, Head of Waste, and the three service level performance measures that I will be reporting on are difficult to kind of paint a real picture because of the pandemic and the nature of people's spending habits and disposal habits. But I think it's something that is changing. There's been a lot of variation in the last 12 months and more recently in the last 3 months, and I think it's something that we are looking at going forward, improving on how we actually deal with these different measures. So if I can just briefly mention the first measure, which is the recycling rate at household waste recycling centres. Historically, that has been up around 75–80% at its real peak some years ago. That has seen a drop in this last quarter down to 71%, which is, we don't fully understand why, but we suspect it might have something to do with the switching off of the booking system, whereby people might have been actually hoarding material which would go to the incinerator, go for energy recovery from the EFW. And it might be a case that people were hoarding bulky items with the expectation that after September the 1st, it will be easier to dispose of that material. That doesn't help with the recycling rates, but it's something that we are monitoring going forwards. And I think in a way to address this, we are looking at having a more clear campaign regarding household waste recycling centres to notify the public, inform the public how they can recycle better, and hopefully we'll see an upturn in this figure, because it does influence the overall picture. And that leads me on to the second item, which is the overall recycling rate. That for this last quarter is around 44%, which is similar to the previous couple of quarters. The historical target is 48%. I think this is a possible reflection on the reduction of HWRC target rate, because that is a contributor to this. So where there is a dip at recycling centres, there will be a dip at the overall recycling. One influences the other. So again, it's something that we are monitoring, and I think we need to be a little bit more proactive in engaging with the public, educating the public, and it's something that we shouldn't sit on our laurels, even though we've been carrying out the same service for many years. And I think there are always opportunities to learn and improve. And I think from looking at looking at what's happened with the paper and card rollouts at Boston and now North Kesteven, I think one thing that is very obvious is that if we have more positive engagement with the public and actually work with the public and are more open and transparent, then people can appreciate why we're doing things. And we've seen a real positive upturn in recycling rates in those two districts, as a consequence of the positive engagement that we've been carrying out. Sorry. So just briefly mentioning the third performance measure, which is the overall tonnage of waste collected. That is the total for this year so far is 546 kilograms per household. The target is 560. There are various factors which could contribute to this. Again, it could be partly down to less material being presented at the household waste recycling centres. There is a certain amount of seasonality with composting, which is around where we would predict, but I think it's kind of in the mix as to contributing to an overall slightly lower than what we would expect. I think the main message that I want to kind of pass over to everyone is that we need to understand why these trends are happening. It's not a local trend, it is a national trend. There's lots of debate nationally about why this is happening. I think on the ground we need to improve the kind of the engagement with the public and education campaigns, which is something that we are looking to do, and provide a clearer strategy to be more positive and not take things for granted. But also in terms of the mechanics of measuring waste, I think we can look at contamination, have better sampling, and as Councillor McNally alluded to earlier, if we can look at demographics of where the issues are, we can be more targeted in trying to improve recycling rates rather than assume it's one problem across the board. And I think one thing that we are doing, which will help to positively influence that, is to have better recycling regimes and better contamination sampling regimes at certain stations, whereby we are actually gathering real-time data that we can then act on a bit more with a bit more immediacy. So I think it's something that we are looking to improve what we're doing across the board, how the service operates, and hopefully we will have some real changes once, fingers crossed, we come out of the pandemic. If that kind of, who knows where the future leads. But if we can kind of create some improvements with what we're doing, I'm sure that we will see some real positivity, and in future months we can report that. But that's more or less where I'd like to leave it, and I'll just open it up to any questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. I'm going to ask you a first question. With the increased use of recycled products, will you need eventually to change your targets because there'd be less thrown away?
Excuse me. Yes, I think there is a definite change in what we are looking to collect within the short term, but even longer term, when we consider the kind of implications of the Environment Act, which will possibly require free garden waste collection, that might have a big impact on recycling rates. And also the big item, the big issue is going to be separate food waste collection. So I think all these targets do need to be looked at as to whether or not they need updating and changing to reflect the actual what's happening, the mechanics of what is happening with actual collection and disposal, because the targets were set many years ago, and I think it's something that the whole waste management sector is changing so much in the next few years. I think it's something that we need to make sure that they are relevant, and we are not just reporting on historical issues which may be out of date, and we could look to update what we're actually doing, and we could be having different performance measures reported in future rather than just bundling various items together, which doesn't create a clear, transparent picture as to what is actually happening. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike. Open up for questions from members now. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I've got a few questions. First of all, with the household waste recycling centres, does the figure vary by site across the county significantly? Are there sites which have a much better recycling rate at the Hwrc and some that have worse? Last meeting I did mention the opportunity to put out textiles banks. It's not minuted, I don't mind, but I would like it minuted this time that there is an opportunity for the council to improve its recycling rate by working with partners to promote textiles recycling. I have had a conversation offline with Mr. Reid about this, and I think we could make more progress than we have. On page 36, we have a comparison of years going back to 2014-15 for household waste recycling centre recycling targets. The equivalent graph is significantly missing by its absence on page 38. We have no annual comparison of overall recycling rates for the county going back in time. I wonder if that's because in 2010 we had a recycling rate of over 50% and our rate has actually fallen back down to 40 and is now back up to 44. We know we can do better if the funding and the political will is available. I didn't understand why the target on page 37, the target says in Q1, Q2 is 48%, but over the page there's a mention of a UK recycling target of 50% by 2020. Are we saying that we're content to be less than the UK national recycling target? And finally, a similar question about the arithmetic. On page 39, we have a target in Q2 of 560, which appears to be going up by the same amount each time, which would lead, if my maths is correct, to a total for the year of about 1,240. But over the page, our target is only 1,000. So I don't understand this difference in target. I mean, I'm not sure that we should have a target for household waste collected. If anything, we should be driving down that target. How has that target altered over the last 10 years? Have we always had a target of 1 tonne per household, or is that something that has gone up or gone down? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. There's quite a number of questions there for Mike. Emily, will you ensure that Councillor Baxter's comments on the recyclables is minuted? Thank you very much indeed. Mike, over to you. Mike.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, apologies. Yes, in addressing the first question by Councillor Baxter, we do have a variation, slight variation across all household waste recycling centres. It's something that, funnily enough, we were looking at this morning and trying to establish if there is a particular reason why there is a variation. It's not a significant variation. We're talking 2-3%, but it's something that we're going to have a discussion internally about whether this might be a demographic issue, whether it's a site management issue, what are the particular local issues that might create these variations. And it's something that we are hoping to dig down on very soon and try and bring everybody up to the highest standard. And it's something which we don't fully understand at this point in time, but we will be analysing and seeing if we can make improvements. In terms of the second question on textiles, LCC has 11 sites where we have textile banks. There are lots of other locations such as car parks, supermarkets, education centres, district council facilities that have textile banks. I think it's one thing that we are happy to engage with the charities, the various charities, Salvation Army, other organisations about textile banks if they think that there is a gap and we need to improve where we can put these banks. It's something that we are happy to talk to highways and internal with corporate property to establish if there is a gap which needs to be filled. I think one thing that we have said offline with Councillor Baxter and Councillor McNally is that if we can identify where the need is, then we can pinpoint and target where we can actually create some improvement. So we're happy to have that discussion offline and try and create an improvement if there is the possibility of doing so. In terms of the third question with historical recycling rates, this is a difficult one to kind of understand, because when recycling initially started being reported on many years ago, rates were significantly different across the country and also across district councils. At some points we were up around 52%, and at other points we were down around 45%, and that was just across different districts. I think it's one thing that we need to understand better, and it's something that we're going to be discussing with our different disposal organisations to establish why the rates should be lower, because we are increasingly offering more opportunities for people to recycle, but we don't necessarily understand why the rates don't reflect that. So it's something that we are very much in the dark on this, and I think we do need to understand better with different organisations as to why the overall rate is lower than the target. And it is a historical target which was set many years ago, and it's something that we need to work better with the private sector to establish if there is something we can do to help improve the actual recycling rate. And if we have a better relationship with disposers, then we hopefully can improve the overall recycling rate. So it's something that it's a challenge that we continually have to try and address. In terms of the fourth item, apologies, I scribbled something down about the 48% target, not content with the 50% target. This kind of just referring back to my previous comment, I think that the 50% is a historical target which was set many years ago. And I think what we need to do is try to understand if that is still the relevant target that we need to meet based on the changes that are coming ahead, because when the 50% target was made, we didn't have the infrastructure in place, but we were around that 50% target. Recycling rates across the country have dropped when opportunities, as I've just said, have increased, and we need to understand why when we're below that actual target. And it's something that it's been discussed nationally with Hwrc and Nordo, with DEFRA, about why we are as a country lower than our overall objective. I think it's something that we will look to kind of come back and report on in future. And then the final point regarding the target of household waste collected, the tonnage collected per household, that is something that, again, we want to keep that as low as possible. We want to minimise that. We want to increase reuse opportunities, as Councillor McNally has stated. We want to introduce different mechanisms for encouraging material to go into different streams and not necessarily be recycled, for example. I think it's something that we do want to try and keep this down, it's a challenge that is going to be difficult, but I think we need to engage better, and we need to understand what people are doing and what people want, because ultimately a lot of this is about behaviour change. And if people say, yes, we see your targets, but we don't necessarily agree with it because of X, Y, Z, then we can in some ways try and at least understand that and try and address what the issues are that are preventing people from helping us recycle as much as we should, because I think it's incumbent on all of us as residents and taxpayers to try and recycle as much as possible. Ultimately, we want to minimise as much as possible, but if we can recycle as much as possible as well after that event, then that will help keep the costs down and ultimately help the environment. So I think it's something that it's an ongoing challenge that we're facing. So I'll just leave it there. If there are any subsequent questions, happy to take them. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Mike. I'm going to now move to Councillor Dyer, because we are running late. We're 10 minutes late. So Councillor Dyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'll be quick. It's just a follow-up, Mike, from Councillor Baxter's question. The recycling target on page 38, that's obviously just for the entirety of the county. Is it possible for you to break that down on a district level? I know, for instance, the City Council, Lincoln City Council, no longer present members with their recycling rates, and they've removed the target altogether. So I'm just wondering, are you able to present it by district? Because obviously I represent a North constituency, and I see all of the promotion that NKDC are doing currently around recycling, and I'd like to think that actually is reflecting now in a better recycling rate. So is that something that we'd be able to do? As a follow-up to that, I'm aware there's some areas in the city of Lincoln, and I believe they're student areas, where actually the recycling rate is so bad, all of the waste, even waste in recycling bins, ends up going to energy from waste plants. Are there any plans to actually stop this and at least get communities recycling? Because it seems ridiculous that in 2021, some areas in Lincoln, it all goes to energy from waste. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dyer. That's a very good question. Mike?
Thank you. Yes. In terms of your first question, Councillor Dyer, we are working on a district council breakdown. It's something which is it's not easy at this point in time because there are variations, and what Boston and NK are doing, for example, is different to the other districts. So it doesn't necessarily reflect a county-wide picture, but what we're doing is improving the individual data that we can give to each district. It's not to kind of criticise any district, but it just enables us to paint a clearer picture for the county and individual districts. So it's at this point in time, we are working on producing the data which is more understandable. However, it is complicated by the issues with separate paper and card, and also how that affects the remaining mixed dry recycler. But it is something that we are working on, and we will make that available as soon as it is complete. In terms of the second point regarding areas in the city and student population, again, this comes back to what I alluded to earlier. I think it's been more targeting where the weaknesses are in the system, and not just generally going out to everyone and not being in a negative way, but trying to positively engage with certain groups, certain demographics. And we will be looking at not only contacting the different organisations such as the university themselves, but we can actually talk to student groups as well, just to help raise their awareness. And I think it's something which we need to do. We need to adapt how we engage with the public and not just treat everyone the same, because everyone has different needs and different issues. So I think one thing is not just communicating one way and telling individuals, telling groups what we would like them to do. I think what we need to do, we need to listen better and understand where the problems are. And if we have a proper dialogue and conversation with such groups, then hopefully we can understand why there is this weakness in the system. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We've had a good debate this morning and we are running late, but I'm sure Kira's captured all the comments. I propose and move that we receive this report and are satisfied with the performance of Q2 and that our comments as recorded are taken into consideration. Can you please raise your hand if you agree? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much indeed. We'll now move on to item 6, Flood and Coastal Innovation Programme, the Greater Lincolnshire Groundwater Project. I've got 5 minutes for introduction and 25 minutes for debate. Thank you. And that's over to Matthew Harrison. Thank you. Welcome, Matthew.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. Yes, I'm Matthew Harrison, Senior Commissioning Officer for Flood Risk at Lincolnshire County Council, and just wish to give you a brief overview today on the Flood and Coastal Innovation Programme for the Greater Lincolnshire Groundwater Project. If I may, I will take the report as read and just pick out on some of the key points to bring to the attention of members. So last year the government announced a £200 million fund for Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme to help deliver the government's policy statement on flooding and coastal erosion and the Environment Agency's National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy for England. The programme is allocating £150 million of the £200 million to 25 local areas, with areas making a successful bid on average receiving £6 million to be delivered between the 1st of April this year, 2021, and the 31st of March, 2027. Lincolnshire County Council, in its role as lead local flood authority, is leading on the development of a collaborative approach based on the existing flood risk management partnership, working across the Greater Lincolnshire geographic area, so working with North Lincolnshire Council, North East Lincolnshire Council, and multiple partners and stakeholders with an interest in flood risk and water management. The partnership has prepared an expression of interest into this bid in January 2021, and the objectives outlined in that included to identify opportunities to manage groundwater in a sustainable way that manages flood risk whilst protecting the environment, enhances watercourses and providing amenity benefits as well. To improve Greater Lincolnshire's resilience to groundwater flooding so that homes, businesses and local communities and the natural capital are better protected. To build on community resilience, to communicate and share the learning regionally and nationally through the proactive publicity of the project, and to improve the capability to provide an emergency response to groundwater flooding. We were successful in our expression of interest, and as a consequence have now moved on to the next stage to develop an outline business case where we will be able to draw down funding to take the project further. A key aspect of the development of the outline business case is to assess existing groundwater flood risk models, which will really give us a picture as to how we can develop some of our aspirations further. And that's a key piece of work in developing the outline business case, as I say. That will be an iterative process which will take us further into the project, and that will determine some how we can deliver against our objectives. One of the key things that we are doing here is also looking at resource, and we have engaged with the National Flood Forum with a community engagement officer to work with some community groups to, as I say, better understand the groundwater flooding issues to communities and help make them more resilient. So the Flood and Coastal Resilience Innovation Programme will provide the opportunity to develop an understanding of a broad range of groundwater risks and opportunities across multiple lead local flood authority areas, leading to a range of practical actions delivered in partnership over the next 6 years. It's intended that these actions should incorporate multiple benefits such that the environment and social resilience is built into the approaches that we develop. Once the outline business case has been submitted and approved, the partnership will then be committed to delivering on the objectives set out in this project as I've described. Comments and guidance by members of this committee will be welcomed on this process and the project as a whole as this develops further. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Members of the committee is invited to consider and comment on the report and provide with guidance as requested to help shape the outline business case that will be submitted in April 2022. I'm now going to open up to members for questions. Are there any questions? Councillor Carrington.
Thanks very much, Chairman. A comment rather than a question, but I would like to very strongly support this, and I thank officers for preparing this paper.
Councillor Carrington, could you move the microphone to...
It's my usual thing of having the microphone far too way away. My apologies, colleagues. Yes, the groundwater issue, an enormously important one, and it's one which I think is far less well understood. When we look at coastal flooding from tidal sources, when we look at fluvial flooding, frankly, it's all been modelled to death. We understand it very, very well indeed. So in the case of coastal, we know that for a particular kind of breach, for example, of the sea defences, we know pretty well exactly what kind of heights of water we will have, what kind of velocity of water we will have. It's extremely well understood. Groundwater is kind of the bad fairy godmother at the party. It's not nearly so well understood, and I think this project is of enormous importance. Yes, the numbers of people affected potentially by fluvial and tidal flooding in Lincolnshire are much greater, but there are many people who are affected by groundwater flooding, both the risk and it actually happens. And I know from experience in my own division and district ward, when it does happen, it becomes horribly real for residents. It is very, very challenging. You have complex hydrology, complex geology, very challenging to find solutions, and often these solutions require a multi-agency partnership, and again, a proper understanding of the knowledge behind this is vital to get those proper solutions for our residents. I have an example in Hayington, which I've had the opportunity of discussing with Mr. Hickman and other officers, where we've actually pulled a group together and are trying to work on this. It is very, very challenging, and I think that this report is an excellent step forward. It will bring investment into Lincolnshire, which is also very important, of central government money. Getting both finance and understanding is crucial to beginning to address this very serious problem. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Carrington. Yes, I can recall several areas on 607 towards Caythorpe and also in Grantham flooding groundwater. Is there any further comments and questions from members? Do you want to come back on that, Matthew, on Councillor Carrington's comments?
Only thank you for those comments and fully support and endorse that, and the reason why we focused on groundwater, as you say, it is least understood of the flood risks that we face in the county, and yet does cause some significant problems to communities and businesses and residents alike. So this innovation fund really will allow us to experiment to a point and push the boundaries and really try and understand this in a much better way, take learning from this, which then hopefully can actually be rolled out nationally, and we can take greater benefit from that in a much wider area. So thank you for that support.
Thank you very much. Any further questions from members? No, if not, then I'll move to the recommendation. I move that the committee receives the report and requests that our comments are as recorded, which is only from Councillor Carrington, are taken into account for further development of the outline business case for the project. Does anyone dissent? Are we all in favour? Good, that's carried. Thank you very much. I propose now to have a short 10-minute break, since we're now ahead of schedule. Thank you.
We are live, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Welcome back. We'll now move on to agenda item 8, which is the planning for strategic infrastructure in Greater Lincolnshire. We've got 5 minutes for this and 25 minutes for questioning. We are now 8 minutes behind, but I intend to catch up on time. Councillor Dyer.
Chairman, I think what comes before that is item 7, the levelling up one.
Thank you very much, Steve, for correcting me. Another mistake, which I'll write in my book, so sorry about that. Item 7, the levelling up agenda for Lincolnshire. Again, 5-minute introduction, 25 minutes for debate. This item is on page 45 to 48 of the agenda pack. It invites the committee to help shape the priorities for levelling up in Lincolnshire. The report will be presented by Vanessa Strange, Head of Infrastructure Investment, who is here in the chamber. Welcome, Vanessa. The actions for this report is the committee is invited to shape priorities for officers to develop in the incoming months and to request progress updates to the committee during 2022 that will be added to our work programme. Over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'm sure it's my fault because I told you that both papers were very connected, so no doubt I caused the confusion. Apologies.
No, it's definitely my fault.
So in Councillor Davies' announcements this morning, he referred to the levelling up agenda and its importance for Lincolnshire. And we have brought today's paper to ensure that members of this committee both remain briefed on the work that has happened thus far this year around levelling up, but also on the work that's being done to prepare us for the future. And I really hope that members can help us shape those discussions today. Levelling up began to be used to describe investment in outcomes that make opportunities more equal. And it is a much used phrase by government to describe a whole number of things. However, the Levelling Up White Paper, which is expected in December, will likely focus on the UK Share Prosperity Fund, alongside other topics such as county deals and the opportunity to think about decision-making at different levels. We probably know more about the funding aspect at this point in time, so that is much of the content of today's paper. The paper describes the work that's happened this year in terms of the Levelling Up Fund, for which the County Council was successful in their application. Members will recall that's the A16 scheme, and that will bring in £20 million of funding around levelling up there. Other work around Towns Fund, Community Renewal Fund all help us to start to understand what might be at the heart of the UK Share Prosperity Fund. So UK Share Prosperity Fund will be the key funding mechanism in levelling up. It will essentially replace the European funding which sat under the European programmes of ESF and EFRID and ERDF. As I say, aiming to reduce inequalities between communities, deliver sustainable, inclusive growth based on our plans for growth. And you'll recall that at your last meeting, colleagues presented a paper on the Greater Lincolnshire Plan for Growth. So very much using that plan as we look forward to develop projects. The criteria for the allocation is still something we don't have. Hopefully that will be with us shortly after the announcements on the white paper. But we do feel that we've already got an opportunity to start to scope up some of our ambitions. And so the work that we're doing is around designing those local priorities and really thinking about how we can best plan and be prepared, because when the announcement comes, no doubt we'll have to move far too quickly. We're focusing on what the challenges are for our communities, individuals and businesses, and how they affect Lincolnshire, and thinking about the rural county as well. In terms of opportunities that we see around UK Share Prosperity Fund, a few that I'd highlight to members. develop the success around that we already find in the Greater Lincolnshire economy, so manufacturing and clean energy on the Humber Bank, agri-food across the UK food valley that we have in Lincolnshire, and a growing cluster of innovative businesses around Lincoln. Low business base churn, indicating the stability of the economy, with something like 64% of employment in our micro and SME sector. Opportunities for businesses to raise their productivity and access new markets is something that we discussed at the last meeting. The region's natural assets and our land and agri-food will be key. The ports, Freeport in particular, but our ports and coastal assets that we have will be part of that mix too. But also thinking about lifestyle benefits of our rural and coastal living, such as outdoor lifestyle and affordable housing, issues that we need to address, and thinking about the wider infrastructure to which they connect. So one of the pieces of work that we'll hear more about in the next agenda item is around the work that we're doing for infrastructure planning, and that's part of our desire to develop a pipeline of projects. But in terms of UK Shared Prosperity Fund, the discussions are much broader, as I've just alluded to, than infrastructure, and really will be wide-ranging. So if we think of the projects that we've seen come forward as part of the Towns Fund deals, as part of the Ambitions for Levelling Up Fund, they include everything from town regeneration schemes to walking and cycling facilities to highway investment. And our approach is really around building that solid evidence base, working out how we will stand out as a county, because everyone is in this same space, so what our unique selling points are, if you like, building on what we already have as our strengths, organising around people's needs, and of course thinking about what our capacity and capabilities are as well, in terms of what we can deliver within the timescales. So as I say, we've posed some questions to members within the paper today, but we would really welcome member input into this discussion at this time. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Vanessa. Now I'd like to invite members of the committee to comment on this item. Councillor Griggs, do we have any speakers yet? Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Whilst I recognise, I actually have a reaction to the term levelling up, because I think the north-south divide has been with us since the 1980s with deindustrialisation of the economy, and I actually think the approach is supposedly top-down, with the government giving us regions money, when in fact, my division represents some of the poorest areas in the country, and whilst I really welcome the Towns Fund, I find it really difficult to understand, as I'm sure some other people will agree, how, when I look at some of the 4 principles of levelling up, when it says spreading opportunity and improving public services, public services, and I know this is outside the County Council remit, have actually been cut since 2010. So I just find it very, very difficult to understand how we can have restoring local pride, boosting living standards, etc., when nationally this is blatantly not happening, with, the postponement or the change of HS2. I know that doesn't actually affect Lincolnshire, and also the health and social care cap. And I just find the whole thing sort of more like a soundbite. And whilst I would really welcome investment in Lincolnshire, my view has always been that there are 2 Lincolnshires. So I represent, you know, a significant part of the urban economy, the city, and obviously the city is very diverse in terms of living standards, but the area I represent is very, very poor. And if I went to a meeting, which I'm going to tomorrow, and talk about levelling up and local pride, they will look at me and say, well, you know, we haven't got affordable housing, we haven't got access to green space. Now, to a certain extent, that is a choice in terms of where they live. But obviously, it's really difficult because Lincolnshire is not, it's a completely different county in terms of, you know, it's a rural county, but there are parts of it which obviously have got completely different problems. So I really would welcome some practical ways of trying to help levelling up in the urban areas that I represent. But I think it's sort of, it doesn't seem to really make me feel much confidence, because in terms of nationally, I know that we're representing a county. I don't think the message is right. And even though there are funds being made available, like the Towns Fund, I think people perceive that there's such an injustice in terms of income and wealth inequality that I don't quite know how this will be received, particularly within my division. So I've got real problems with it. Thank you for listening to me having a bit of a rant here. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Kelly. Yes, Vanessa, would you like to comment on that speech?
I suppose what I might take from that is about how we, as an organisation, understand the needs of our communities well, and how important that is. And one of the things we clearly do is rely on our members to understand that, but it's also about the engagement work that we do, and making sure that wherever possible we don't approach that in a top-down way. There is clearly a role for professional advice, but if someone lives in a community, they clearly have an understanding and live and breathe that space as members do of their patches. So I'm not sure I can respond to all of the thoughts raised, but certainly my view is that the importance that we take in terms of any project delivery I've ever been involved in, we've been keen to focus on how we engage with those communities. And some of the best work we do is where we have really local delivery too. So, and that can be on all sorts of fronts. It can be on urban spaces. I can also think of where that happens really well in rural business projects. So some work in my area, some European funding known as LEADER, would be a really strong example of where actually the decisions are made by what they term a local action group. So really local business people making decisions on funding and projects that come forward, rather than it being a sort of officer-led approach. And actually that's an example where there have been quite a number of groups championing that approach to DEFRA as part of levelling up, and I'm sure that's the case across other sectors. So we are in a bit of a wait and see space as to how UK Share Prosperity Fund will come forward, but I certainly take the councillors' comments on board.
Thank you very much indeed. My next speaker is Vice Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I must admit, whilst I'm appreciative of the paper, and I think any extra money coming to Lincolnshire is fantastic, most of my comments will be in a similar vein to that of Councillor Kelly. It does feel a bit like a soundbite. You know, members across this chamber generally have been lobbying MPs to complain that government have cut our highways budget. You know, it's all well and good levelling up to focus on transport, but they're directly cutting our ability to provide good transport links. You know, I don't represent a metropolitan area as such. You know, I represent Boston, and we have some of, like many areas of Lincolnshire, some of the highest levels of deprivation in the country. We have significant lack of transport, and it just does seem a bit like a soundbite. Yeah, we had fairer funding, we've got levelling up. And again, it's complete respect to the officers both at the county, the boroughs and districts of Lincolnshire that we've actually managed to get some money out, because it does seem that the scheme's come up and you've given about 4.5 minutes to put in an application with all the information they require. And our officers across the county have done fantastic getting the money they have. But I do find it somewhat disheartening when, you know, we all know that places like central London get approximately twice the funding per head of population, and the square footage or the area of those regions is significantly smaller, so it doesn't have the challenges of providing services rurally. So again, I'm grateful for the paper and I'm grateful for the officers, but I do think that the government needs to pull its finger out, and if it genuinely wants to tackle levelling up, it needs to focus on the places like Lincolnshire that have massive areas of deprivation, complete lack of transport. You know, Boston has some of the highest private rent in terms of wages in the country. So, you know, affordable housing is a great blanket term, but when it's still 7-8 times the average income, it's not really affordable. And when the private rent is significantly more than that, again, is completely unsustainable. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thank you, Chairman. I suspect that a similar conversation may crop up after the next paper as well. So I might bleed into some of that now. So apologies if I do, Brendan. One of the things that we look at, particularly in terms of infrastructure and connects to your comments there, are the challenges of bringing sites forward. So I think many of us are aware of the ambitions for growth in housing across Greater Lincolnshire. And the numbers of housing that we have as targets, but the difficulties for making those sites viable, and the balance that we have to strike, I suppose, as local authorities between making sure that we have houses built, but that we also have the appropriate facilities that go with them. So for me, one of the important things that we need to look at around levelling up is about connecting into that infrastructure conversation, so that we get growth within the county that we need, that we get those houses that we need, but that the communities also have the facilities that they absolutely need and deserve to have in their patch too. So I think that's something that we would understand in terms of that homes agenda and housing agenda.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So next speaker is Councillor Spratt. Councillor Spratt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to say my good friend Councillor Kelly is well back on form again. She used the word rant. Of course, being a gentleman, I would never use that expression, but it struck me that she just used the opportunity to have a total go at the government and pretty much every Tory for the last 40-odd years. She did mention deindustrialisation was the word I think she used. I watched a documentary on YouTube last week about the British shipbuilding industry in the 1970s, which of course many years ago used to be a marvellous industry, and now it does exist but in very limited forms. And talking about industrialisation, the key point that came over in that documentary was there's no point in producing big ships if nobody's buying them. And so there was a certain inevitability, the way the economy has gone over the last 40 or 50 years, that there would be that level of change, much the same as the Industrial Revolution. I welcome this report, and I'm going to keep my comments brief from now on, Chairman. But I do agree with Vanessa. I'm just going to make a comment on the infrastructure report as well. The key point here is that the government has got to get growth back in the economy. It's as simple and straightforward as that. And there's a combination of measures that can be taken by the government that have been taken, the Levelling Up Fund, the Towns Fund, infrastructure development, which Vanessa has touched on, and I know Brenda will talk about in the next report in more detail, is key to stimulating the private sector. And the spending on infrastructure will indeed stimulate the private sector, but also the help that the county council has been directly to people. I know Councillor Baxter is going to come in a minute, but he mentioned earlier on, I think it was Councillor Baxter, that some businesses were left out. So it might have been Councillor Kelly. Some businesses were left out in grants that were given. Again, you know, you can't, nothing's perfect in this world. There will always be people and businesses that move out. But I think this report and the infrastructure report are absolutely excellent. The money that the county council's being given is being spent in a proper and appropriate way to stimulate local economic growth. Could we do with more? Of course we could. Of course we could, Chairman. And interestingly, I know I have said this before, the whole argument in terms of economic policy demonstrates, and the way the attitude of the county council has operated, the officers and the members, it is a recipe for future devolution for this council and other councils who seem to have a good grip on economic development locally and can use that grip in order to stimulate growth, which will benefit the people in Councillor Kelly's division and my division as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Before Vanessa responds, I note your comments on Councillor Kelly, but I have to remain neutral as your chairman, so please bear that in mind. Vanessa, do you want to respond?
Simply to say that across the two papers, really, the big drive for officers is about being prepared and being able to articulate really clearly to government, and that's whether it's in response to a call for projects in terms of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, or indeed in terms of any county deal discussions. We need to be able to articulate to government what it is that we need in Lincolnshire. And for a period of time now, we've been on a journey, excuse the phrase, to be able to describe that in a much stronger way, and to really be able to talk about our needs, yes, in terms of infrastructure, but in terms of other projects as well, so perhaps around skills or around business growth. So the opportunity that we're taking now is really building that case for government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve, Vanessa. And my next speaker is Councillor Baxter. Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. These expressions like levelling up, I treat with some suspicion. I suspect that there is some political motivation behind them. They remind me of things like Green New Deal, big society, education, 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 back to basics, all of them. Everybody can agree with what they think they might mean because they mean something different to everyone who hears them. And I think partly it's motivated by the north-south divide. And I notice on page 46, we've got mention of the Midlands Connect and Engine. I admit that I don't know what that is. And transport for the north, I'm pretty sure I know what that is, and I'm not sure how it relates to Lincolnshire. However, if we've got this agenda, then we need to squeeze it for all it's worth. We need to squeeze as much money out of Whitehall and the south into Lincolnshire as we can. So let's interpret this levelling up as, let's have the Lincolnshire levelling up, which often equates to whether or not you've got a car. So if I wanted to level up Lincolnshire, I'd want services to be as accessible to people without a car as they are to people with a car, which might mean more public transport. I'd want access to community infrastructure, to places of employment, to cinemas, to good schools, to public art, and I'd want that access to be, I wouldn't say regardless of income, but income shouldn't be about, so it shouldn't be that rich people can have good education and poor people can't. That's I think we acknowledge that levelling up means that we should all be able to give our children and our adults good education and good access to art and good access to employment. Not for the children, obviously. The final thing I would say is there appears to be a typo in paragraph 4. I don't mean to be, well, I do mean to be frivolous. The levelling up spend profile, in year 1 we have 0.2 billion, in year 2 we have 0.9 billion, and in the following years we have £1.40.
Yes, thank you for pointing that out, Councillor Baxter. Yeah, I mean, you're right about the sound bites, but you remember back to basics, so they've done their job. I'll now go to Vanessa for reply.
Thank you. I'll take your last point first and say apologies for the typo. Also apologies for using phrases like Midlands Connect and Midlands Engine, and it's interesting, isn't it, that they don't mean very much, perhaps if you're slightly outside the public sector kind of officer sphere, which is an interesting comment. Transport for the North, of course, is slightly more does what it says on the tin, and it's our sub-regional transport body which does cover North and North East Lincolnshire, which is why it's captured in the report, because much of this work is thought about at a greater Lincolnshire level. but it does also impact particularly some of our rail services. So we do have a connection into TfN, particularly in terms of rail. Midlands Engine looks at the economic activity across the whole of the Midlands, so East and West Midlands, as it was sort of formally thought of in Regional Development Agency days. And Midlands Connect, again, is a sub-regional transport body for the same area. So setting transport policies and strategy at a Midlands level, and particularly has a responsibility to government to recommend particular schemes, perhaps things such as improvements for strategic road network. So some of our larger roads particularly would fall under that level of category, but also commissions pieces of work. So perhaps looking at energy systems as we decarbonise the transport networks, things that tend to make sense to be looked at a larger scale, really. So hopefully that helps with that piece. And in terms of accessibility, we might call it a really interesting comment there about how we measure that, and something we actually capture within the local transport plan work that we've been doing is that sort of access to employment, access to services, access to leisure. So it is that sort of wider gambit piece in terms of making sure that people, and access to health is the other one that we particularly look at as well for information. And for me, that sort of shows how a number of pieces of work that we've currently got running and that are live all feed into this sort of agenda and our ability to describe our priorities to local government, to central government rather. So I'm sure if we are in a space of whether it's Shared Prosperity Fund or County Deal or whatever space we're in, transport and highways will be a big part of the discussion, and I mean sort of transport in its widest sense. So the work that we're similarly doing on bus service improvement plans and enhanced partnerships for the Bus Back Better strategy that councillors might particularly like the name of that government strategy is also currently live at the moment. I hope that helps. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vanessa. I've got two more speakers and I'm going to close the debate down. We're running now 6 minutes behind. So the next speaker is Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Some of those points I was going to make have now been covered, so I will not repeat them. Just to comment that hopefully it's our responsibility to ensure that the levelling up is not the soundbite. I mean, to be fair, it's the government. They've actually renamed the department that. It's unlike some we've heard in the past, and we have the north-south divide, and that's clearly always a debate. And even this year in the Cheshire and Amersham by-election, those complaints are there that all the talk and investment is going to the north of the country. So clearly a north-south debate, even when we discuss the subject. And yeah, locally, it's our role to see that we are spending this on our local priorities, and pleased to hear the comments from Vanessa there regarding transport and buses, and I mean regarding our local priorities, we spoke about skills and housing and the low wages in some parts of our community, and also from some of our most rural areas. To access bus stations and train stations is a challenge. There's also a cost, so there's work there to do, but I do welcome this report, and again it's our role to make sure we do represent our residents and make sure this is not a soundbite and we can actually deliver on this paper. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Taylor, you're right. I mean, I represent Grantham in the South Division there. There's always comments from members of the public that the north of the county, Lincoln, gets more money than the south. So levelling down would be good as well as levelling up. So our next speaker is Councillor Dyer. Councillor Dyer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And some of the comments actually have been really interested, and I've noted down some of the points made by members, and I'll certainly feed that back to Councillor Davey. And I'm sorry to hear that Councillor Baxter doesn't like phrases. Perhaps his group leader will be disappointed, because a fair deal Phil likes his phrases as well, Mr. Chairman. And I'm sorry that Councillor Keeley gets triggered by the phrase levelling up, so I'll just say it a few more times, Mr. Chairman. Levelling up, levelling up, levelling up. But I think there's just some points I just wanted to cover off, if I may, Mr. Chairman. I think the HS2 announcement. I think the government announcement was a PR disaster, wasn't it? Because it was £98 billion, I believe, of investment in rail infrastructure in the north of the country, which is the most in a generation. It was just poorly sold. But actually, those improvements that are going to be made will be able to be made quicker than what HS2 would have been able to was going to deliver. I think HS2 was going to be delivered by 2040. These are going to be delivered far quicker, which is important to get that investment in. But in the county, I had a meeting with West Lindsey District Council last week, and I can see Councillor Bowles has sat behind me. The investment in Gainsborough through the cinema complex there, that's hopefully going to open up a whole area of Gainsborough, and hopefully it's going to be a catalyst for the town, and I really do hope it will. And I'm watching that closely, and I know West Lindsey and the MP, Sir Edward Lee, are all keen to see that progress. Regarding the Towns Fund, Councillor Keeley, I'm disappointed that you're not seeing the benefits in your division, because actually the Towns Fund scheme in Lincoln, there's been several schemes that are actually impact your division specifically, highway schemes, which are going to be a great improvement. And also, if you think about the Eastern Bypass and the North Highcombe Relief Road, taking traffic out of Lincoln, improving the air quality in Lincoln and making lives better for anybody in the city. So there's so much levelling up going on in the city. You may have become blind to it, Councillor Keeley. I think, though, there's two important points, isn't there? Devolution, that's something I think we're all crying out for. And I watch this closely, and hopefully government have seen how well we can deliver the levelling up agenda in Lincolnshire. And actually, let's deliver more powers to local government, because we know our communities best. And I suppose two things that I'd like to see from the levelling up agenda that are outside the County Council's remit. It's improvements to the Nottingham to Lincoln main line. And I know that is actually on Midlands Connects engine. And I've got, hopefully, all being well, I've got an event in Parliament next week where I'm going to be there. And I know that's on the MP for Lincoln's agenda. But also, it's improvements to the A1. Which is a Highways England project. I know Caroline Johnson, Gareth Davis, etc. are all complaining to government about the quality of the A1, and I appreciate councillors in that area will have concerns as well. So I think they're the two things that I'd like to see, Mr. Chairman, but there is lots going on. So levelling up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dyer. That's the last speaker. I'm now going to go to the recommendations, and I move that we endorse the report and request our comments in relation to areas of priority as recorded be taken into account. Further, I move that we request a progress update is featured in our May committee meeting. Please raise your hands if you agree. Thank you, that's unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. We are now 10 minutes behind, you'll be pleased to know. Move on to item 8, which I got by mistake last time. Thank you, Councillor Dyer, for reminding me, which is planning for strategic infrastructure in Greater Lincolnshire. This item is on page 49 to 88 of the agenda pack and invites the committee to consider and comment on the agenda for planning for strategic infrastructure for Greater Lincolnshire. The report will be presented by Brendan Gallagher of the Strategic Planning Team, who is here in the chambers. Actions are the committee is invited to agree on the priorities for officers to develop an up-to-date evidence-based infrastructure matters and, if relevant, suggest additional or alternative projects. Over to you, Brendan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the introduction. Firstly, can you hear me okay? Good. Okay, I'll try to speak up. Yes, yeah, you reminded me of that last week, so I'll try to improve that, and I'll try to be quick, mindful of time as well, mindful of where we are. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the introduction to the agenda item. As you say, we're focusing on strategic infrastructure here. If I can leave you with one thing from the work that we've done this year in 2021, it would be to draw your attention to page 87 of your agenda pack and the summary of our proposed £1 billion pipeline of infrastructure projects. As you can see in the diagram there, we also talk through the potential benefits of that pipeline that's come through our 2021 evidence development. From the covering report, you will see that we are proposing to revisit the pipeline next year in 22, and it's my aim and our aim that pipeline will grow in terms of its capital expenditure and in terms of its benefits. And I'll talk through the reasons as to how and why we believe we can do that. So the evidence that we have done this year and the evidence that we will do next year sits at a Greater Lincolnshire level. So I'd like to record my thanks to Greater Lincolnshire partners who have helped and supported in developing this work so far and to date. It sits between national documents such as the National Infrastructure Strategy. It seeks to deliver Greater Lincolnshire documents such as the Economic Plan, which you heard about at last month's meeting. And it seeks to bring up local documents such as the local plans at district level and their supporting evidence, as well as town-based documents that many of you will know about from your own areas. And it followed a call for projects that identified many projects, 59 in fact from memory, and provided a great deal of detail about those, which we now have stored within a database to put us in a good position of readiness for when funding opportunities arise, such as levelling up. Two projects that I'll identify within our area as examples. One is the North Highcombe Relief Road, which we've already talked about. That scored relatively well against our scoring matrix and methodology. A lot of work's been done already to secure funding for that, and the case that was made to us through the SIDP, the plan process, the evidential process for this year, was seeking to put colleagues in a good place to secure a little bit of further funding. That's, as you will know, a key strategic route in and around Lincoln and the Greater Lincolnshire area, securing access to ports and the coast, as well as to some of the important urban areas across Greater Lincolnshire. And another example is the Sleaford Moor Enterprise Park. So that was really about delivering infrastructure in and around that site, and the site has potential to deliver against some of our key sectors, including potentially agri-food, as set out within the economic plan. To start to bring this to a bit of a summary, I'm pleased with where we've got to and proud of where we've got to through this year's work, especially given some of the challenging circumstances around continuing to work remotely across many organisations. But what we've done is, as ever, a point in time in this evidence. We can and aim to improve the process for 2022, particularly along three areas that I've set out in my report. We aim to address thematic gaps, two of which would include digital infrastructure and health and care infrastructure. There weren't too many projects identified through this year's pipeline. We'll also be seeking to deliver a step change in our collaboration and our proactive engagement of partners, particularly on some of those thematic areas that I've mentioned. And we need to develop greater openness and sensitivity in our processes and methodology so that we are more sensitive to longer term projects and longer term pipelines so that they score better in our pipeline going forwards. The aim will remain to promote our collective readiness to establish a comprehensive pipeline of projects for now, and to have a longer term view on proposals and projects that have a good fit with our collective strategies. So that concludes what I think I need to say on the report and the appendix, and I'd be very happy to discuss further points. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Brendan. I mean, Councillor Dine mentioned in the previous article about investment around Lincoln. I travelled to Kings Lynn last week and I got stuck on the A16, stroke 17. And it was an awful journey. And I think if we need any investment, it's down in that corridor route between Kings Lynn and Boston. That's my comments. I'm now going to open up to members to contribute. Have any speakers? Councillor Bowles.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'll just speak about the page around Gainsborough, because that's obviously where I represent. So, you know, the infrastructure projects that the residents talk to me about, that's sort, you know, I can only speak about what I know. As Councillor Dyer said earlier, the Levelling Up Fund bid from West Lindsey, you know, was successful, and obviously hope that as that comes in now, the £10 million in the town centre area can have a massive impact on regeneration in that area and the wider town itself. So, you know, look forward to the county council working with the district, as Councillor Dyer said, to deliver that, and hopefully some of these other projects across the town. As I mentioned in the report, Gainsborough's a growth point status for housing development, which is fine. You know, it brings in the houses, hopefully improves the economy, all the additional residents. But the biggest issue a lot of these residents face is that they have to go out of town for employment. So they travel to Scunthorpe, Lincoln, over the bridge, Doncaster, Sheffield. So of course their biggest issue is transport and road links, train links, same as everywhere else in the county. So I'm pleased to see the A15 is on that page for the Gainsborough and Lincoln areas, because that is a massive issue. And I'm going to throw it in there, it's not on here, but a second bridge for Gainsborough, I think should be on these agendas. We're seeing it time and time again, as the town gets busier, as there's more residents, as there's more travel, that area is becoming more and more gridlocked. If you hit it at peak times, you can be quite often sat in the backlog all the way back to Beckenham roundabout on the other side of the river. It only takes a car to break down, some traffic works, for the whole town centre area to grind to absolute gridlock. Only last week there were some traffic lights in the bridge area, people waiting 3 hours to get over the bridge into Gainsborough. My phone at 5 o'clock was ringing red hot from parents whose children were coming back on buses from Retford, who'd been sat in queues for 3 hours. So I think, you know, that project for me needs to be looked at again. And my only other question is on and this might be my ignorance, so I apologise if it is, I can see there's a Gainsborough green grid on there. I don't have any understanding about what that is. I'm assuming it might be to do with the national infrastructure projects around the area, but if somebody could just clarify for me what the Gainsborough green grid is, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dee. Brendan, are you able to answer that question? Thank you.
Yes, specifically on the Gainsborough Green Grid, that's a series of cycle and pedestrian routes that would be greened.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Any more speakers? Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation, Mr. Gallagher. This looks, I mean, it is a collection of potential schemes, which is very welcome. I'm particularly pleased to see on page 15 or 67, Tallington Bypass and Bridge. And I'm sure people will, in my division, will look at this and think, oh, great, we're going to get a bridge or a bypass. We're not necessarily, by putting it in this document, we're not necessarily going to get it, I assume. If we are, then what's the timescale? When can I drive across this bridge? So you look through the document and it all looks great, and then you think, well, what is missing? And I think it's great. Can I ask for a reminder as to why we look at this as a greater Lincolnshire project rather than just a Lincolnshire project? That needn't take very long. But there are parts of the county where you can't even get mobile phone signal coverage, and I'm sure that broadband speeds are also a problem. Is broadband and mobile coverage something that is to be addressed through this levelling up agenda? Because I'm sure that residents of Ednham would love to be able to use all networks equally for their mobile phones. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. If you look at page 77, you'll see that the same problem occurs in Market Raised and in Caister. So it's obviously connectivity problems all across Lincolnshire. And we're talking about one Lincolnshire, not just Lincolnshire, the greater Lincolnshire area.
But why?
That's our aspiration, one Lincolnshire.
I'm not sure it's my aspiration, but...
It is. Brendan.
I mean, just from a sort of documentary point of view, I'll try not to get into the ambitions debate. But from an officer point of view, we have documents like the Greater Lincolnshire Economic Plan. So we've drawn those as our strategic sort of starting point. So that's why we've progressed on those lines on an evidential basis. So I hope that answers that point. In terms of the digital point, as I mentioned when I was talking, we see that as a thematic gap through this year's pipeline. We know that's a problem. We need to go out and find solutions now. So next year that'll be a key focus for us to look at the digital debate. There's evidence already in preparation around that, but that's a key focus.
Thank you, Councillor Baxter. Do you wish to come back?
Well, I would ask...
Yes or no?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. When are we getting the Tallington Bridge? And I'm sure that applies to many other projects in many other parts of the county. That just happens to be the one that catches my eye. What does it mean that something is on this wish list?
I think, Brendan, you have to answer that question.
So it is more than a wish list. It's a prioritised pipeline. So there are projects which are prioritised for the short term and demonstrated a strong degree of strategic fit and deliverability. It might be unfortunate for you to hear that Tallington wasn't particularly high on that list in terms of its strategic fit or deliverability. And I'd be happy to talk through that with you in a bit more detail, perhaps after the committee.
Thank you very much, Steve. My next speaker and last speaker is Vice Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'll make this one short. Based on my rantings of the last agenda item, I think this document really does show how fantastic our officer corps pool across the county has been. And it was really, really useful for me personally, as I'm sure it was for other members. You know, we're here to represent Lincolnshire, not our own divisions, and it's really easy to get tied up in, because you know your division, you know what's going on, you know what you hope is going to happen in the future. So it was really eye-opening for me to see all the different projects going on across Lincolnshire, which again just built my confidence in officers even more. And all I can say is that I hope that you're as successful in bidding for future pots of funding as possible to make as many of the future projects reality as possible. And that's it.
Thank you very much indeed. As there are no further speakers, I'm going to go to recommendations now, and that is I move that we note the detail highlighted in the report and request our comments in terms of priorities as recorded be taken into account when updating the infrastructure priorities matrix. If you all agree, can you please raise your hand? That's unanimous. Thank you very much, Steve. Now move on to the last item, which is the tree strategy, the right tree in the right place. I find this article, along with other agenda items, interesting. So the item is on page 89 to 94 of the agenda pack and provides the committee with an update on the Green Master Plan and the initial progress towards the Council's target to reach net zero carbon by 2050. The report will be presented by Dan Clayton, Sustainable Manager Environment, who is here. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So the report covers the funding that we've already got, some new funding streams that are coming forward, and then our ambition to create a tree strategy for the county in the future. So earlier this year, we put in a successful application to the Local Authorities Treescapes Fund. That was part of a funding pot that was put forward by the Forestry Commission, and this was to deliver trees in non-woodland settings, and it was partly encouraged by DEFRA and the Forestry Commission because they recognised the loss of trees through the ash dieback disease. And when our highways officers have been out and surveyed the network on the main highways network, ash trees are our most common tree along that route, and we expect to lose round about 80 to 90% of them through ash dieback over the next sort of 10 years. And we've seen that over 60% of trees are already showing signs of this disease. So it's going to become a significant issue that impacts on highways issues, but also on the kind of views and landscapes around the county. So this funding gives an opportunity to kind of start to replace some of those trees and tackle those issues. We contacted every district council and every parish council to see if they had suitable sites for planting trees on land that they controlled, and the map that's part of the report shows the response that we've had. So we've got an excellent geographic spread right across the county. Every district is covered. There are a few late applications as well that have kind of come in after that map was produced. So Stamford Town Council have just identified a significant number of trees that are going to be added to the scheme as well. We went out to tender earlier in November, and the tender's due back at the end of this week, and we've had a couple in already, and that will then look to start planting from January. So that's going to go ahead. We're hoping to have some events to kind of promote the activity as well. We've got a large site at the police headquarters at Nettleham, adjacent to that's going to be planted up, and we're hoping to have a significant event as part of that. The second part is there's a lot of funding coming from the government and the Forestry Commission and the Woodland Trust into tree planting, and the county as a whole has got one of the lowest tree coverage rates in England. I think the total is 3.8% compared to an England total of 10%. So and that's obviously because we're a largely agricultural county. The other thing is that kind of from the access and public health side of things are that although we are a rural county, a lot of the populations around Lincolnshire have poor access to natural open spaces. So this funding potentially gives an opportunity to start to try and address that. So the Trees Call for Action Fund is a new scheme that's been put forward by the Lottery Heritage Fund and the Forestry Commission and DEFRA, and it's not aimed at tree planting in itself. It's more aimed at support for officers and engagement activity. So we're hoping to put in a bid for this. We've submitted an expression of interest, and now we have to put together a full-scale bid that will go in January if we can kind of get approval from that. And we're looking to include as many of the district councils, and also North East Lincolnshire have also indicated that they would like to be part of the scheme. We also asked North Lincolnshire to make it a Greater Lincolnshire project, but they're already part of a forestry partnership scheme with East Riding and Hull, so they wouldn't be able to join our project. So we're looking to submit a bid for around about £350,000, aiming to get a woodland officer who can do the collation of sites activity with landowners to get some larger areas of planting. And then if we can get that role, that kind of leads into then the tree strategy development as well. So we've got some information from the Greater Lincolnshire Nature Partnership, who've done some opportunity mapping for locations where it would be suitable to plant new areas of woodland. So they've done that work. There's also in the report a map that's been produced by the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and it shows large areas of the county are suitable, obviously not in the kind of grade 1, grade 2 agricultural areas, but there are some areas of lower quality agricultural land where there is the potential to plant some larger areas of trees, and there are some significant grants available that will pay for up to 80% of the costs through the England Woodland Creation Offer. So we're looking at those, and as I said in the title, it's about putting the right tree in the right place. So we don't want to plant trees on important habitat areas already. We don't want to plant them on wetland areas. We want to identify the right locations, and I think that tree strategy will do that. And the other key element of tree planting is around urban trees and street trees, and the new Environment Act gives the council some new powers around highways trees and street trees, and I think that's what the strategy needs to look at that as well. So overall, we've kind of got some funding, and we're hoping to get significantly more funding to kind of push this agenda forward and reach the target for a tree for every resident, which was 750,000 trees over the next few years. And there's also some agroforestry opportunities as well. So there are some large fruit tree providers who are looking to develop large areas of apple and pear orchards, and they've been kind of priced out of their traditional areas in Kent. They've looked for similar areas of soil quality and weather, and they've identified the southern part of Lincolnshire as a suitable location. So that could be one of the providers is looking at over 1 million apple trees in the south of Lincolnshire over the next 3 years. So that will make a significant difference as well. So that covers the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. I mean, you're right. Your heading is the right tree in the right place. I note now, particularly in the Grantham area, that new developments are going to be tree-lined, which is very welcome. When you think of Sheffield, where they're taking trees down, so it's good for the environment. It's good for us, and also very welcome indeed. The actions on this report, members, is the committee is invited to give support to submitting an application to the Trees Call for Action Fund and to review and comment on progress toward developing a tree strategy, I'll get out in a minute, for the county. I'm now going to open up to members of the committee for comments. So are there any comments, Councillor Baxter?
Thank you, Chair. Great idea, great report. I'm really pleased that this agenda is moving forward. I dare say it's moving forward faster than the equivalent at South Kesteven, but please let's make that a race. Trees are one of the few things in sustainability that everybody seems to agree on broadly, a lot more than either nuclear power or solar power or electric scooters. A lot of the sustainability arguments cause division, but trees, unless that tree happens to be casting a shadow over your conservatory, trees tend to bring people together. And I dare say that 1 million apple trees in the south of the county will cause less consternation than the 5 solar schemes that are coming forward. Does the scheme include hedgerows? So where we're saying we're going to plant trees, are we also going to plant hedges? I suggest that we do, because the number of hedgehogs in this country has gone down to less than 1 million, which is bad news. If parishes want to join in now, are they still able to? Can they still come and kind of join lately? And finally, is there any overlap, or is there anything the county is going to do in terms of the Jubilee planting celebrations that are planned for next year? Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, on the Jubilee, the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, yes, we will be taking part of that. So we've identified a number of the trees will be suitable to be part of the Queen's Green Canopy. I mentioned the site in Netleham, that will have a tree there that will be part of the canopy, and potentially, I mean, all of the ones that we're planning to plant as part of the Treescapes Fund could be designated as that. On the hedgerow planting, it's not allowed to be included in the Treescapes Fund, but there are support grants through the Woodland Trust for hedgerow planting. So what we've done is, where locations are asked for areas of hedgerow, we've kind of used that as additional funding. So we're looking to add to that. And I think the idea from the if we get the Trees Call for Action Fund money was that would look to link up existing areas of woodland through improving hedgerows between. That would be one of the key projects in that. So yeah, and then with the kind of the wider county-wide stuff, we are trying to work closely with all of the districts to to look at the strategies they've got. I think North Kesteven already has a tree strategy, and several of the districts are looking to kind of emulate that. So we'll be working closely with them on producing that.
Thank you, Dan. Can you tell me, are we working with the Woodland Trust on this project?
Yes, Woodland Trust will be a key part of it. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Any further comments from members? We haven't had much so far. We've still got some time. Councillor Carrington.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be brief as we're moving toward the end of the meeting, but I'd just like to thank Mr. Clayton for an excellent report, and indeed excellent progress which is already being made. It's easy to write reports, it's much harder to actually get that progress going, and it clearly is. You could almost talk about this, if we're back to slogans, as plant back better. And it's more, I think, than just our climate change response and our broader green agenda. It's a thing about the quality of life, and I'd like just to focus, if I may, particularly on page 93, where we talk about the future tree strategy, which is to come back to us in the early part of next year. The Woodland Trust has 5 priorities which are suggested to us for consideration, particularly focus on strand 3, which is about trees and planning, and also Trees and Streets, Strand 5, because those are the ones that actually put trees where the people are, as opposed to putting them in other places where vitally nature is. And it does seem to me that as our strategy is developed, there is an opportunity for it to be of practical help, particularly if, and I would put this out as a plea, our officers continue to work very closely with local planning authorities. Mr. Clayton made reference to the Environment Act. That is now an act, but some of the statutory instruments that will go with it are not yet known. We do have, however, the National Planning Policy Framework update in July of this year brought us new paragraph 31. And that, Chairman, is where your phrase about tree-lined streets actually comes from. I'm going to choose my words very diplomatically. I'm not convinced, having a professional involvement in this, that all developers are equally well equipped to translate tree-lined streets into action. It's going to be a big job there, both for the county, particularly as local highways authority, and for local planning authorities. If we ask ourselves what planning is for, I would say in 3 words, it's to make places better, which is pretty much what local government is for. So I would ask that we do work very closely with LPAs to help provide practical help to developers. If you go back 100 years, no developer would have dreamt, other than in the most basic tenement development, of building houses without tree-lined streets. Go back 150 years, when a lot of the housing around these council buildings was created. Exactly the same thing applied. It's a lost skill, and I think we have a role to play here in helping rebuild that skill and building that one back better. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Carrington. Any further comments from members? No, right. The proposal is that I move we receive the report and request that our support towards submitting an application to the Trees Call for Action Fund is recorded. I also move that we have reviewed the report and are satisfied with the progress made in the development of a tree strategy for the county. Finally, I request that our comments as recorded be taken into account in future actions to be undertaken in relation to both the application and the tree strategy. Can I ask if you support this to raise your hand? That again is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. And we are now ahead of schedule. Congratulations. We are now on item 10, the Environment and Economic Scrutiny Committee programme. This item is on page 95 to 99 of the agenda pack. This item enables the committee to comment on contents of its work programme. The report will be presented by Hwrc, Scrutiny Officer. The actions are the committee is invited to review that work programme and highlight any additional scrutiny activity which could be included for consideration in the work programme. Over to you, Hwrc.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. This is to remind members that this is a standing agenda item. The work programme is being reviewed at each meeting of the committee to ensure that its contents are still relevant and will continue to add value to the work of the council and our partners. I would like to take your attention then to our next meeting in January the 18th. We will be reviewing the revenue and capital budget proposals for 2021-2022, which is a pre-decision item that will be decided upon on the 1st of February and will subsequently go to County Council for final decision on the 18th of February. We will also receive a report on the carbon reporting tool and a report on property flood resilience trial. We will also receive a report in Lincolnshire World's Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty, and we will be informed of the key priorities. And we will also receive an information-only item on local transport plan number 5. I would like to make you aware that an item has been removed from the next meeting's agenda, and that is the internationalization strategy meeting, and that is due to the fact that the working group will not be meeting until later in January 2022, and therefore we will not have sufficient time to receive an update. Therefore, it has been moved to our February agenda. Last but not least, as derived from today's meeting, in one of the next meetings in May 2022, we will expect to receive a 6-month update on the infrastructure planning. Thank you very much indeed. That concludes my update.
Thank you, Hwrc. Are there any comments from members of the committee? None at all. Thank you very much indeed. And as I move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed in pages 95 to 99. Can I ask you to raise your hand if you agree? That's carried unanimously. That brings us nearly to the end of the meeting. Rachel, thank you very much indeed for bringing your students with you today. Is there anything you'd like to say to the committee?
Yeah, I just would like to say thank you for allowing us to come in. The students really value getting out of the university at the top of the hill and coming down into the city and seeing what actually happens in politics. Ultimately, we see what's on in the government and we see the powers of Parliament, but actually getting to see it firsthand is a great opportunity for them to understand. And hopefully they can apply that to their assignments and their study in their future degree and then onwards with future work.
Thank you very much indeed. Any of your students would like to say anything? Deathly silence, probably. No?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of nominated as the class spokesman normally. I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for just, letting us sit and observe. And thank you for the coffee. It was great.
Thank you very much indeed. I shall now formally close the meeting, but before I do so, may I thank all the officers for their support and work throughout the year, and all members for their contributions and support, but most particularly Emily and Kiera from the Democratic team for their valuable support throughout the year, most appreciative, and for Emily for keeping me on track as well. So all that remains to me to wish you a Merry Christmas and a healthy New Year. And at 12:30, I now close the meeting. Thank you.